When you've been a territorial governor for what feels like 300 years, you figure you've witnessed the full spectrum of human folly. Range wars, land disputes, claim-jumping scandals, and the occasional romantic entanglement that sets the telegraph wires buzzing clear to Washington. But Governor Thompson had never, in his long career, been dragged into an emergency meeting at 3 o'clock in the morning. The main hall of the governor's mansion looked like a frantic rummage sale of desperation. 17 different town mayors and cattle barons were all shouting at once, gesturing widely with dusty hats and half-smoked cigars. The feud between the Granger and McCoy clans had been poisoning the valley for 47 years, and everyone was sick of it. Everyone, that is, except the Grangers and McCoys, who seemed dedicated to the idea of wiping each other off the map for all eternity. "Governor," wheezed Mayor Bloxham, his portly frame straining the buttons of his vest. "We have a problem." Thompson's eyes rolled in weary unison. "Let me guess." The peace talks fell through again. The Grangers won't give up the stolen water rights. The McCoys demand payment for 47 years of rustling and barn burnings. And I'm supposed to wave a magic wand and fix it. "It's worse than that," Bloxham continued. "They've agreed to one last parley. We have 3 days. If we can't make a deal by then, they're bringing in dynamite to reroute the river." A hush fell over the room. Dynamite on that scale hadn't been used since the railroad blasted through the mountains. The last time someone tried something similar, it created a new, uncrossable canyon that folks still took Sunday picnics to stare at. "So naturally," Thompson said, his voice soaked in sarcasm, "you want me to work a miracle and get 2 families, who've been trying to murder each other for nearly half a century, to start sharing recipes and planning a barn dance together. That's the spirit," Bloxham declared, entirely missing the tone. "But we're not sending you alone. We've hired you the best protection in the territory." Thompson's interest was slightly piqued. "A Pinkerton man? One of those former Texas Rangers?" "Better," Bloxham said, consulting a piece of paper. "We got you an Apache." The silence that followed was so absolute you could have heard a snake shed its skin. Then, as if a dam had burst, the room erupted into chaos. "An Apache," shrieked one mayor, his face turning pale. "Have you all gone stark raving mad?" "They're from the desert wastelands," whispered a man in the back. "I heard they eat peyote for visions," added another. "They can track a man across solid rock." Thompson stared at the mayor, his diplomatic instincts at war with his basic will to live. "You want me to negotiate the most important treaty in this territory's history while being guarded by a man from a tribe that considers this whole valley their stolen birthright?" "His name is Tarza," Bloxham said with pride. "Came highly recommended. And his fee was very reasonable. Now, if you've never seen an Apache warrior up close, let me paint a picture." He was tall for his people, lean and wiry, with a stillness that was more unnerving than any overt threat. He had a face that seemed carved from the canyon rock itself, showing no emotion, which is frankly terrifying if you're used to the open book of a card sharp or a politician. And he carried a long knife at his belt that looked like it could field dress a buffalo, or a man, with equal ease. Tarza was sitting in the governor's waiting room, calmly chewing on a piece of dried meat. But this wasn't some butcher's jerky. This was Apache jerky, which meant it was tough enough to break a settler's tooth, preserved with spices that would make a grown man weep, and made from an animal that had likely been run down on foot. "Governor Thompson," Tarza said, rising. His voice was quiet, a low rumble like distant stones shifting. He gave a slight nod, a gesture humans called acknowledgement. Thompson stared at the man, who seemed less a bodyguard and more a living embodiment of the wilderness itself. "I am Tarza. I will see you are safe on this journey." Thompson's training barely kicked in. "Yes, well. I trust your skills are as advertised." "I am sufficient," Tarza said, taking another piece of jerky. "I am keen to see this parley. I have not witnessed one between your people before. It should prove more intriguing than my last duty." "And what was your last duty?" Thompson asked, immediately wishing he hadn't. "I was teaching the young boys to hunt." The silence hung heavy in the air. Finally, Thompson managed. You taught children? Yes. 5-year-olds. They are good boys, but full of spirits. Always running, climbing, putting strange berries in their mouths. One must be ever watchful. Thompson's mind spun. This man had been tasked with controlling multiple Apache children at once, the young of the most feared people in the territory, and he'd managed them in groups. The job description mentioned needing a man who could handle tense situations and wasn't shy of conflict. Tarza continued calmly. After settling a dispute between two boys over who gets the best bit of the rabbit, I believe I can manage a pair of angry ranchers. You are aware, Thompson said carefully, that your people are considered the most dangerous in these lands. Tarza paused his chewing. Me? Truly? That is strange. I am a quiet man. I do not even eat meat during the spring fasts. You are Apache, Thompson pressed. Your homeland is a Class 12 death zone, according to the Army surveyors. The land is so harsh the official guide recommends a 17-page will just to travel through it. Ah, that, Tarza waved a hand dismissively. The desert has a few sharp edges, but one learns its ways. It is true, there are plants that poison and many animals with teeth, but it is not so bad. Just last week, I was tracking deer in the mountains and came across 2 cougars. 2? Yes. A mother and her cub. Very beautiful. I gave them a wide berth, of course. One does not come between a mother and her young. Thompson realized his breathing was shallow. This man had casually encountered 2 of the territory's most lethal predators and called them beautiful. In any case, Tarza said, finishing his jerky, when do we depart? I have packed my necessities. He gestured to a small deerskin pouch. That's all you've brought? Thompson asked. Of course. I have another strip of jerky, a water skin, my honing stone, and a few useful herbs. Oh, and my grandfather's knife. One never knows when you will need to cut something free. He touched the hilt of the weapon at his side, which looked like it could be used for everything from whittling to warfare. Right, Thompson said faintly. I suppose we should be on our way. The stagecoach is ready. Excellent, Tarza said, adjusting his pouch. I have never ridden in one of your wagons for such a long distance. This will be an adventure. As they walked toward the stables, Thompson couldn't escape the feeling that he was embarking on the most perilous diplomatic mission of his career. And the most frightening part was that his bodyguard thought it was going to be an adventure. The stagecoach, named the Peacemaker, was a marvel of frontier engineering. It was built specifically for carrying important men safely through hostile country, with a reinforced frame, a driver and shotgun rider armed to the teeth, and enough ammunition on board to hold off a small army. What it did not have was a provision for an Apache passenger. So, Tarza said, settling into his seat and looking around the cramped cabin. This is interesting. Very confined. In my lands, the longest journey I have taken was by foot for 12 days, and we had the entire sky for a roof. The driver, a veteran named Grizz who'd been hauling passengers for 2 decades, nearly swallowed his chewing tobacco. 12 days on foot. Oh, it's a good way to travel. You see the land. We find our food as we go. Much better than this salted pork. The Tarza pulled out what appeared to be a small, gnarled root from his pouch. Care for some? I have extra. The entire coach, including Thompson, leaned away collectively. Thompson quickly intervened. That's very kind of you, Tarza, but I don't believe our stomachs are accustomed to your people's food. No matter, Tarza said, biting off a piece of the root with a sharp crack. More for me, the smell that came from the root was earthy and strange, making the other passengers eye him with suspicion. Tarza, meanwhile, was chewing with every indication of enjoyment. So, Tarza said between chews, tell me of these people we are meeting. The Grangers and the McCoys. What is their story? Thompson launched into a detailed history of the feud, the disputed water rights, the stolen livestock, the simmering resentments that had finally boiled over into open warfare. Tarza listened with quiet focus, occasionally nodding or asking a sharp question. He said when Thompson was done. 47 years of fighting over a creak and bruised pride. That is a long shadow. You know, my people had a similar conflict once. Well, several times. But there was one blood feud that lasted for generations. Generations, squeaked the man sitting opposite them. Yes. The feud of the Swift River and the Redstone clans. They fought over who had the rights to the winter hunting grounds. It took them 100 summers to realize the deer did not care which clan hunted them. And how did it end? Thompson asked, in spite of himself. Oh, the elders grew tired of sending their sons to die. They finally sat down and made a treaty. Then they joined together to fight the soldiers instead. White men are strange like that. You cannot seem to sit still for very long. The other passengers exchanged nervous glances. This man was casually describing a century-long war as a minor historical footnote. But, Tarza continued, at least we eventually make peace. My great-grandfather fought the Navajo, and now my people trade with them for blankets. We are good at letting go of old hatreds when there is a reason. Fought the Navajo, the driver asked weakly from his perch. Oh, that was a great war. Lasted many years. A terrible business, but it was settled. Tarza pulled out a small, intricately carved piece of wood from his pouch. Would you like to see the pattern my wife learned from a Navajo weaver? Beautiful work, amazing colors. It is hard to imagine we tried to kill each other not so long ago. He traced the pattern with his finger, completely unaware that he was casually discussing a former enemy nation as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You know what is funny? Tarza said, putting the wood away. I spoke with an old Navajo man once, and he told me of his grandfather who fought in that war. We shared stories of our grandfathers, and then we shared his tobacco. Good tobacco, too. Very strong. By this point, the other passengers were staring at Tarza with the kind of horrified or usually reserved for a lightning strike. Here was a man describing how his people engaged in brutal tribal warfare and then bonded with former enemies over a smoke. Tarza, Thompson said carefully, why are you telling us this? Oh, I just thought it might be useful for the parley. I mean, if my people can figure out how to stop fighting and start trading, maybe these Granger and McCoy folks can too. Sometimes men just need to sit down and share a quiet moment together. Tarza stood up and stretched, his lean frame unfolding in the cramped space. His movements were so fluid they made the other men feel clumsy and loud. Speaking of which, is there a place on this wagon to stand? I have been sitting for 3 hours and my legs are growing restless. The roof, I suppose, Grizz said automatically. But it's not really meant for. Excellent, Tarza said, already climbing out the window with the agility of a lizard. I will get some fresh air. Nothing strenuous, just some basic balancing. After he left, the coach fell silent except for the creaking of the wheels. Finally, the man opposite Thompson spoke up. Did he just say he was going to stand on the roof for fun? And he wants to give the feuding families roots to eat, added the other passenger. His people fight for 100 years and then make friends over tobacco, whispered Grizz. Thompson slumped in his seat. I'm beginning to think this mission might actually succeed, he muttered. And that terrifies me more than anything. 20 minutes later, Tarza dropped back into the coach, looking refreshed. Behind him, the driver was frantically trying to figure out why the luggage rack on the roof now had a series of perfectly balanced, and slightly alarming, rock cairns on it. A good ride, Tarza said calmly. This will be an adventure. The neutral town of Harmony Creek was a monument to wishful thinking, a dusty outpost positioned exactly halfway between the Granger and McCoy ranches. It had been established specifically for peace talks, with every detail calculated to show no favor. The meeting was to be held in the town's plain, unadorned church, with identical wooden benches and identical lighting from its 2 windows. What it did not have was a plan for dealing with an Apache. Remember, Thompson whispered to Tarza as they approached the church. Just stand quietly by the door and try not to. Well, exist too noticeably. Understood, Tarza whispered back. I will be as quiet as a shadow. The fact that Tarza could likely become as invisible as a shadow somehow made Thompson even more nervous. The church doors swung open with a groan, revealing a scene that would have been impressive if it wasn't so tense. On one side of the aisle sat Jedediah Granger, a 70-year-old patriarch built like an old oak tree, his face a roadmap of scars from 1,000 conflicts. His pistol belt was worn and battered, each nick a souvenir from a skirmish that had claimed other men's lives. His eyes burned with the cold certainty of a man who had spent 47 years perfecting the art of the grudge. Across from him sat matriarch Eloise McCoy, a woman of living iron whose posture could shame a drill sergeant. Her voice, when she spoke, was sharp enough to cut wire. She was flanked by her 3 sons, each a smaller, angrier version of herself, their hands hovering near their own holstered pistols. "Governor Thompson," Jedediah Granger's voice rumbled like a rock slide. "I trust you know this is just for show. The Grangers have no intention of parleying with fence-cutting thieves." "Thieves?" Matriarch McCoy's voice cracked like a whip. "Your family wouldn't know an honest day's work if it bit you on your backside, which, incidentally, is what my boys intend to do." "Excellent," Thompson muttered under his breath. "We're off to a wonderful start." He cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could start by reviewing the property lines drawn up in the 48 Treaty." "The 48 Treaty is void," Granger declared, slamming his gnarled fist on the pew in front of him. "It was signed under duress while my father was laid up with cholera. Your father agreed to those lines because he was caught red-handed trying to brand our calves," McCoy retorted, her sons nodding in angry agreement. "The only thing he was suffering from was a chronic lack of morals." "That's it." Granger stood up, his huge frame filling the aisle. "I'm done with this farce. My riders will resume diverting the creek in 6 hours. This time, we're not stopping until every last blade of your grass is dust." "You bring it on, you grizzled old goat." Matriarch McCoy's form seemed to bristle with righteous fury. "We've got new rifles from back east that will turn your men into coyote bait." Thompson watched 47 years of potential peace turn to smoke in less than 5 minutes. This was going exactly as horribly as he'd expected, which meant it was going worse than he'd hoped, but not quite as catastrophically as he'd feared. Yet, perhaps, he tried desperately, we could discuss the water rights separately from the cattle rustling. "The water rights are not negotiable," Granger growled. "That creek has run through Grangerland for 3 generations. It's on Grangerland because you moved the damn boundary markers." McCoy shot back. "We have a surveyor who can prove your fence posts have been migrating north for 20 years. That was a natural drift of the soil. A natural drift that coincidentally relocated 47 acres of prime grazing land into your possession." "Ladies, gentlemen," Thompson said, raising his voice. "Perhaps we could take a short recess and—" "We're done here," Granger interrupted. "The Grangers have wasted enough time." "For once, I agree with the old badger," McCoy said, her sons already beginning to shift into what looked suspiciously like a pre-shootout formation. The McCoys have better things to do than listen to his tall tales. Tarza, who had been standing silently by the door as instructed, chose this moment to raise his hand, much like a student in a classroom. "Excuse me. I do not wish to interrupt, but is there a well nearby? This is a fascinating discussion, but the air is very dry, and I do not wish to miss what happens next." The room went silent. Not a thoughtful silence, but the dead quiet of people whose minds have just hit a wall at full speed and need a moment to restart. Granger's fiery eyes fixed on Tarza. "What," he said slowly, "is that?" Matriarch McCoy's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's an Apache." The silence stretched. Tarza looked around the room, apparently confused by the sudden focus. "Greetings. I am Tarza. I am only here to ensure no harm comes to Governor Thompson during the parley. Not that I anticipate any trouble. You all seem like reasonable folk." Granger's hand moved instinctively toward his pistol. "There's an Apache in the church." "I can see that, Jedediah," McCoy replied, her son shifting into a defensive cluster. "The question is, what do we do about it?" "Do about what?" Tarza asked, his face a mask of calm curiosity. I am just here to watch. Think of me as a fly on the wall. A friendly, thirsty fly who is hoping someone can point him toward some water. Governor Thompson, Granger said, never taking his eyes off Tarza. Why did you bring a desert savage to a peace talk? He's my bodyguard, Thompson said weakly. Your bodyguard? McCoy repeated. You brought an Apache bodyguard to protect you from us. Well, when you put it that way, it does sound a bit insulting, Tarza said. I'm sure you are all perfectly safe. I mean, this is a peace talk, isn't it? What is the worst that could happen? The silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. Both families stared at Tarza with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for a rattlesnake in the bedroll. Right, Granger said finally. New plan. This parley is postponed indefinitely. Agreed, McCoy said immediately. The McCoy family needs to consult with our strategists. About what? Tarza asked. About you, both leaders said at the same time. Me? But I am just here for the water and the interesting political theater. I am not meant to take part. I am more of a, what is the word? An observer. A very quiet, very harmless observer. Jedediah Granger and Eloise McCoy shared a look that somehow managed to bridge their 47 years of animosity. It was a look that said, we may want to kill each other, but we both recognize a fundamental change in the situation when we see one. The recess, Granger said, backing toward the door, will be extended indefinitely. Agreed, McCoy echoed, her sons already hustling her toward the other exit. As both clans fled the church with a speed that defied their age, Tarza turned to Thompson with a confused expression. Did I say something amiss? I was only trying to be polite. Thompson stared at the empty church, then at Tarza, then back at the empty church. Tarza, he said slowly, I think you might be the most effective diplomat this territory has ever seen. Is that so? Good. Now, about that well. 20 minutes later, Tarza returned to the church, sipping from a dipper of cool water. He'd found the town well and had somehow managed to draw a bucket without making a single sound, a feat that had made the town blacksmith, who was watching from his smithy, cross himself. All right, he said, settling onto a pew. I am hydrated and ready to learn more about the white man's politics. This is most educational. Thompson, who had spent the last 20 minutes being accosted by frantic messengers from both camps, looked as if he'd aged a decade in the last hour. Tarza, I have something to tell you. Both sides are calling in their men. Their men? Their ranch hands? The ones with the rifles that can shoot a man from a great distance. Tarza paused with the dipper halfway to his lips. Wait, are they planning to have a fight here, during a peace talk? They're planning to have a fight here because of the peace talk. Or, to be more precise, because of you. Me. Tarza's face showed genuine surprise. But I have done nothing but ask for water. I have been very careful not to interfere. Tarza, Thompson said gently, you are the interference. Your mere presence has convinced both sides this is some kind of ambush. That is foolishness. I am one man. What could I possibly do to two families of armed ranchers? Before Thompson could respond, the church doors burst open. Jedediah Granger strode in, his dusty coat now supplemented with a shotgun and an extra pistol. Behind him marched a dozen of his toughest ranch hands, their rifles held at the ready. Apache, Granger announced, his voice booming with the authority of a man who had stared down stampedes. You will explain yourself. Now. Ah, hello again, Tarza said, nodding calmly. I am just here to make sure no one harms Governor Thompson during the talks. Standard bodyguard duties. There are no talks, Granger declared. The McCoys have rallied their entire clan. They are clearly preparing a massive attack, using this parley as a distraction. That is a shame, Tarza said, looking genuinely concerned. Have you tried speaking to them about it? The old man's fiery eyes widened. Speaking to them? Yes. Communication. It is a remarkable tool my people use where you employ words to explain your thoughts, rather than assuming the other person is a mind reader. It is very effective at preventing misunderstandings. Before Granger could reply, the church's other entrance flew open. Matriarch McCoy swept in, her form now flanked by her 3 sons and a score of armed men, their new rifles glinting in the dusty light. "Granger, you old cheat," she announced, her voice echoing in the rafters. "Your riders have been spotted. The McCoys will not be caught in your cowardly trap." "Our riders?" Granger roared. "You're the ones who sent for your kin first. We sent for them in response to you sending for yours. We sent for ours because you sent for yours. That doesn't even make sense. You don't make sense." Tarza watched this exchange with the patient look of a man who had, indeed, spent years managing children. He took a slow sip of water and cleared his throat. "Excuse me." Both patriarchs turned to glare at him, their men still aiming their weapons at each other. "I do not wish to interrupt," Tarza continued, "but it sounds as if you both did the same thing for the same reason. You both saw the other's men gathering and decided to protect yourselves. That is not treachery. That is simply caution." "The Apache speak sense," Matriarch McCoy said slowly, her voice losing some of its sharp edge. "It does seem a logical progression," Granger admitted grudgingly. "Right," Tarza said, standing up. "So, the real question is, why are you both so afraid of one another? You have been feuding for 47 years. You must know each other quite well by now." "We know them well enough," Granger growled. "They're land-grabbing parasites who want to steal our water. And they're backstabbing rustlers who want to steal our cattle," McCoy added. "Okay, but here is the thing," Tarza said, walking calmly down the center aisle with his water dipper. "You both just accused each other of wanting the same things, land and water. That is not evil. That is just what people need to survive. All people need those things." He stopped directly between the two leaders, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he was now standing in the crossfire of 2 of the most dangerous families in the territory. "So instead of fighting over who gets what, why not simply share? This is a very large valley. There is enough for both of you." The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard the dust mote settle. "Share." Granger said the word as if it were from a foreign language. "Share," McCoy repeated, her stern face flickering with what might have been confusion. "Certainly," Tarza said, taking another sip of water. "The Grangers are very good at ranching and digging wells, yes? And the McCoys are excellent at raising crops and, I am guessing, managing livestock. We are known for our corn," McCoy admitted. "And Granger wells are the deepest and cleanest in the territory," Granger added with a touch of pride. "Perfect," Tarza said. "So why not work together? The Grangers could handle the water supply and security. The McCoys could handle the farming and the cattle. You would both have what you need, and no one has to continue shooting at each other." "But," Granger said weakly, "we are enemies." "Why?" Tarza asked simply. Because they ambushed our men at the creek 47 years ago. Because you built your line shack on our sacred burial ground without asking," McCoy pointed out. "Because you never told us it was sacred. Because you never asked. Because we did not know we were supposed to ask. We had never met you before." Tarza watched this exchange with a look of growing understanding. "So, let me be clear. You have been fighting for 47 years because of a misunderstanding that occurred when you first met." Both leaders stared at him. "That is factually accurate," Granger said slowly. "We have been fighting over a failure to communicate," McCoy admitted. "For 47 years. You have been trying to kill each other for 47 years, Tarza repeated, because nobody thought to say, 'Pardon me, this might be a problem. Can we speak on it?'" The silence stretched on. Finally, Granger spoke. "When you put it that way, it sounds profoundly foolish." "Monumentally foolish," McCoy agreed. "So," Tarza said, finishing his water, "do you wish to try that conversation now?" The one you should have had 47 years ago. Jedediah Granger and Eloise McCoy looked at each other across the church aisle. Really looked at each other, perhaps for the first time in decades. Matriarch McCoy, Granger said formally, the Granger family apologizes for building on your sacred ground without first attempting to speak with you. Patriarch Granger, McCoy replied, her voice equally formal, the McCoy clan apologizes for attacking your men without first stating our grievance. Would it be acceptable to move your cattle operations to the west pasture? Would it be acceptable to establish a joint patrol of the valley, with shared profits from the next cattle drive to market? That would be highly acceptable. Tarza smiled, a rare and fleeting expression. See? Was that so difficult? Both leaders turned to stare at him, their expressions a mixture of gratitude, embarrassment, and utter bewilderment. Apache Tarza, Granger said slowly, you have just ended a 47-year war in 3 minutes using nothing but common sense. And the slightly terrifying implication that your people are far more sensible than we are, McCoy added. Is that so? Tarza said, looking pleased. Good. So, are you going to be friends now? We are going to be very, very careful neighbors, Granger said. We are going to be extremely cautious partners, McCoy agreed. And we are both going to pretend that we always plan to resolve this peacefully, Granger continued. And we are never, ever going to mention that it took an Apache to point out we were acting like fools, McCoy concluded. Sounds good to me, Tarza said. Now, should we probably tell your men to put their rifles down before someone gets nervous and starts shooting out of habit? Both leaders suddenly looked very, very tired. Yes, they said in unison. We should definitely do that. As they began frantically calling off their men, Tarza turned to Thompson with a satisfied look. See? I told you this would be an adventure. Thompson stared at him for a long moment, then began to laugh. Not the polite, political chuckle he had perfected over decades, but the deep, slightly hysterical laughter of a man who had just seen a miracle performed with a dipper of water. Tarza, he said finally, you are the most terrifying diplomat in the history of this territory. Thank you, Tarza said, apparently taking it as a compliment. I think I am starting to enjoy this line of work. Within 6 hours of the treaty signing, the news had blazed across the territory's telegraph lines. The San Francisco Chronicle's headline read, Apache ends 47-year feud with water and common sense. The subheading was even more striking, savage wisdom achieves what decades of politics could not. Tarza, the man at the center of this territorial sensation, was sitting by the town's corral, carving a small piece of wood into the shape of a hawk. I still do not understand all the excitement, he said to Thompson, who was fielding his 47th congratulatory telegram. It was clear they were just having a communication problem. Any child could have seen it. Tarza, Thompson said, setting down a stack of telegrams with the weary relief of a man who had spent 30 years in politics and was only now seeing true success, you do realize you've just been awarded the Territorial Peace Prize, the Governor's Medal of Harmony, and the McCoy family has named their firstborn grandson after you, right? That is kind of them, Tarza said, making a delicate cut on the hawk's wing. Do any of those come with a good horse? I am thinking of getting a new one when I return to my people. Before Thompson could answer, a delegation of newspaper reporters from 3 different states descended on them like a flock of noisy crows. Sketch artists buzzed around them, their pencils flying across paper, focusing on Tarza with the intensity of hunters spotting rare game. Mr. Tarza, shouted a reporter from Denver, whose suit seemed entirely too warm for the climate. How does it feel to be the most successful diplomat in the history of the West? Tarza looked up from his carving with the expression of someone who had just been asked to explain the migratory patterns of birds to a rock. I am not a diplomat. I am a bodyguard. A very poor one, it seems. No one even tried to harm Governor Thompson. So, technically, I did nothing. But you ended a 47-year feud, squeaked another reporter, this one resembling an excited prairie dog. Did I? Tarza asked, looking genuinely puzzled. I thought Mr. Granger and Mrs. McCoy ended their feud. I just asked them to speak to one another. That is not ending a war. That is just basic manners. The reporters exchanged glances that managed to convey both thrill and terror. Here was a man who had done the impossible and was treating it like he'd helped someone find a lost cow. "Mr. Tarza," said a third reporter, this one a stern-looking woman from back east. "What do you believe this means for relations between settlers and the native tribes?" Tarza paused his carving, considering the question with the serious focus he gave to all inquiries. "Well, I suppose it means people should probably talk to each other more, instead of assuming the worst. That is very basic, is it not? My students, the 5-year-olds, learn that lesson by the end of their first season." "Your 5-year-old students," the Denver reporter's voice rose to a squeak. "Yes. They are very good at resolving conflicts, once you teach them to use their words instead of throwing stones at each other. Come to think of it, that is rather what happened here, except with rifles instead of stones." The silence that followed was the kind of deafening quiet that happens when an entire group of people simultaneously realizes they've been reporting the wrong story. They thought they were covering a political breakthrough. Instead, they were witnessing a man casually compare a range war to a playground squabble. "So," Tarza continued, apparently unaware of the existential crisis he had just caused, "are there any other feuds I should know about? I mean, if people just need someone to point out that they should speak to each other, I have some free time before the summer hunts begin." Thompson's eyes widened in horror. "Tarza, no." "Tarza, yes," shouted the prairie dog reporter. "Are you offering to mediate other conflicts?" "Certainly, why not? It seems simple enough. Plus, I would get to travel. I have never seen the great northern forests. I hear the hunting is excellent." Within minutes, Thompson's pockets were buzzing with new telegrams from every trouble spot in the West. The Wyoming sheep ranchers wanted to hire Tarza immediately. The Arizona silver miners were offering him a permanent position. The feuding railroad barons were prepared to pay him in whatever currency he preferred, up to and including his own weight in gold nuggets. "Tarza," Thompson said desperately, "you can't just solve every conflict in the West on your way home." "Why not?" Tarza asked with genuine curiosity. "If they are all just communication problems, it should not take very long. I was planning to do some tracking anyway. I could combine it with a bit of conflict resolution. A working journey." The reporters were now scribbling furiously, their pencils moving so fast they were practically smoking. The story was improving by the second. "Mr. Tarza," the woman from back east said, "what would you say to critics who argue that your people are too savage to be involved in the politics of civilized men?" Tarza paused his carving halfway through a feather. "Too savage? That is odd. I am probably the least dangerous man I know. I do not even kill spiders. I just put them outside." He thought for a moment. "Although, I suppose if someone had tried to harm Governor Thompson, I would have had to do something about it. But that is just basic bodyguard duty." The way he said "do something about it," with the same calm tone he'd used to describe relocating spiders, caused every reporter in the vicinity to take a collective step back. "Right," Thompson said, standing up quickly. "I think that's enough questions for today. Mr. Tarza needs to rest before his journey home." "Actually," Tarza said, "I was thinking of staying a few more days. I have never slept in one of your hotels before, and I would like to see the blacksmith work. Plus, I heard there's a good saloon on the main street that serves something called sarsaparilla. I have no idea what that means, but it sounds interesting." The thought of Tarza wandering around the West, casually ending feuds and trying new drinks, was apparently too much for the reporters to process. They began shouting over each other, their questions creating a cacophony that sounded like a gunfight waiting to happen. "And this," Thompson muttered to himself, "is how Tarza accidentally started the second great newspaper war." But Tarza, oblivious to the chaos he had sown, was already planning his next move. "I wonder if they have any of that fizzy water here. You know, the kind that bubbles. I saw a man drinking it once. It looked delicious." The reporters, upon hearing an Apache casually discuss the latest modern beverage, fled with impressive haste to file their stories. Within minutes, Taza and Thompson were alone again, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of a job well done and a dozen new political crises brewing. "Taza," Thompson said finally, "promise me one thing." "Of course." "What?" "When you go on your journey, try not to end any more wars by accident." Taza grinned, that rare, unnerving expression. "I cannot promise that." "What if I meet more people who just need to talk to each other?" "It would be rude not to help." Thompson looked at him for a long moment, then started laughing again. The deep, slightly hysterical laughter of someone who had just realized the West would never be the same. "Taza," he said, "you are going to be the most accidentally successful diplomat in American history." "Good," Taza said, finishing his carving. "I think I am going to like this job." And somewhere, in the dusty expanse of the frontier, 17 different feuding families began preparing peace offerings, just in case a certain Apache decided to take a journey through their lands.